Opening comments. How does brainwashing get intelligent, mentally healthy people to make illogical decisions? Why is it so effective? I have been trying to answer such questions for many years. The results of my research have led me to believe that it has to do with a process that the mind uses when making decisions. In this presentation, I will be explaining what my research has led me to believe concerning brainwashing, or actually better said, thought control, the mind's decision-making process, and how brainwashing affects this mental process. Before we continue, I suggest that you first forget everything you have heard about brainwashing. I say that because a lot of misleading information is going around about this phenomenon. I suggest that you trace what you have been led to believe and start from scratch before viewing this video. I have divided brainwashing into two categories. Number one, constructive brainwashing. This is when brainwashing is used to help people. The brainwasher is seeking to help others. Number two, destructive brainwashing. This is when brainwashing is used to abuse people by misleading them. The brainwasher is seeking some form of personal gain at the cost of others. So if you have thought brainwashing to be a bad thing, it is not. In reality, this knowledge is a blessing. The problem is not brainwashing, it is those that abuse it. What is brainwashing? Brainwashing is a process consisting of a number of tactics, each tactic designed to serve a specific purpose in the brainwashing process. The tactics used will depend on what the brainwasher is trying to achieve, the situation at hand, and who they are trying to brainwash. Why resort to brainwashing? To control behavior by means of thought control. How is thought control achieved? By controlling the information that people are being exposed to. The mind can only work with information it has received and stored. How effective is brainwashing? Extremely effective. Actually, the question is not if an individual can be brainwashed, but rather, how long will it take? I have found that two things help deter brainwashing. Number one, knowledge of brainwashing, how it works, and so on, which will be given in this presentation. And following with number two, knowledge of the subject the brainwasher is trying to brainwash people in. If you are not professionally involved in politics, then generally it will not take long to brainwash you in the subject. If you are not professionally involved with the COVID-19 vaccine, then generally it will not take long to brainwash you in this subject. If you are not professionally involved in the study of our physical and natural world, in other words, science, then generally it will not take long to brainwash you in this area. The devil's circle. Brainwashing is the most effective form of human influence I have studied. When two or more people compete for followers, be it religious thought leaders, political thought leaders, or whoever, if one resorts to brainwashing to gain an unfair advantage, the other competitors must also. If not, they will surely lose. Thus they all resort to brainwashing. The result is much too often a vicious spiral, often causing competitors to resort to highly effective but also evil and dangerous tactics, such as the slandering tactic and the bad news tactic, with one competitor trying to top the other's evil acts. I call this the devil's circle. This is the historical dark side of brainwashing. Who wins when brainwashing is involved? The best brainwasher, not the best one for the job. To brainwash somebody, you need to get their undivided attention, and you need to make them understand the information you are putting out. Thus, the victim must have the mental ability to concentrate on the information being given, and they must have the mental capacity to understand the given information. With that said, contrary to what many believe, a brainwashed individual is by no means somebody that is dumb or stupid. A good brainwashing process is very effective. Many people see brainwashing or thought control as something terrible. However, it is not. Knowledge of this phenomenon has proven helpful when in the right hands. The problem is those that abuse it. Many thought leaders are using brainwashing to mislead their followers, causing them to make bad or illogical decisions. The thing is, brainwashing is also very effective when trying to make a lie seem true. One person will use brainwashing to con others or enslave them, making them believe things that are not true. Again, I call this destructive brainwashing. Another will use brainwashing to turn a child against drug abuse. This is something good and helpful to others, so I call this constructive brainwashing. Are all brainwashers that resort to destructive brainwashing terrible people? People that intentionally and knowingly mislead others for personal gain? No. Many are brainwashed victims themselves. They have been led to believe that they are helping others and do not see the damages they are causing. Brainwashed victims often become brainwashers themselves. In addition, many do not know that they are resorting to a brainwashing process. They are simply teaching the way they were taught, using the methods that were used on them. Such brainwashers are often sincere, caring people that have a strong desire to help others. This is often the case with religious thought leaders. In my search for answers, I have studied countless explanations of brainwashing and have noticed that many different explanations are going around. Some I found to be the result of serious research, however many to be absurd and the result of wild fantasy or jump-to-conclusion research. The list of tactics a brainwasher puts together to create an effective brainwashing process can be as long as your arm or as short as your finger. The number of tactics a brainwasher will use will generally depend on their knowledge of brainwashing. In addition, the process that each brainwasher puts together is as unique as a fingerprint. Brainwashing is not a step 1, step 2, step 3 process. It is a matter of understanding the goals that must be reached, seeing to it that these goals are reached, and knowing how to deal with each situation as it comes. The key is not trying to memorize all tactics. The key is to know the different things that must be accomplished and then accurately visualize what can be done to achieve each of these goals. I spent years studying thought control tactics, filtering out what is effective and not effective. In the end, I had a long list of effective tactics in which each, in its own way, strengthened the thought control process. However, the ultimate question remained: why does it work? How is it that certain tactics put together in a process successfully lead level-headed and intelligent people to believe ridiculous stories, then in turn cause them to do things that not only make no sense, but are insane? It became clear to me that these tactics are working with a mental function of the mind, being the process the human mind uses when making its decisions. Thus my question was, how does the human mind make its decisions? There must be a process that it uses. So I hit the books to see what science is saying about this. I found nothing that I could accept, so I began to look for the answer myself. A couple of years ago, I unraveled this mental process. After further observation, I am comfortable releasing what my research has led me to believe. In this presentation, I will be explaining what I believe to be the mental process the mind uses when it makes its decisions. This is the reason why brainwashing works, and a must-know when trying to understand brainwashing. Terms that have been linked to brainwashing explained. Okay, I'm going to explain something about 4 terms here: indoctrination, mind control, thought control, and brainwashing. Thing is, some of these terms I do not use, and I want to explain why I do not use some of these terms. Beginning with indoctrination, when I walk down the street asking people to define or explain indoctrination, I get all sorts of different definitions and explanations. Issues of the doctrine are historical, dating back throughout history. The word itself came about around 400 years ago. Since then, terms like indoctrinate, indoctrination, and indoctrinating came into use. However, what exactly are they describing? All methods and processes of sharing the doctrine, or one particular method or process of sharing? All methods and processes of teaching the doctrine, or just one particular method or process? Some think that indoctrination and brainwashing mean the same. However, that depends on what one thinks indoctrination is. The terms indoctrinate, indoctrination, and indoctrinating lack boundaries. Thus, I avoid using them to avoid confusion. So, I will not be using the term indoctrination. Moving on to mind control. The term mind actually defines the entire mind, not part of it. The term mind control is often used to describe brainwashing. However, this is not really the case. Brainwashing is territorial, meaning it only affects trains of thought that deal with a specific subject, not the entire mind, nor all subjects. For example, if one is brainwashed in the subject of politics, the individual will remain normal with other subjects. Is it possible to control the entire mind? Considering everything that the mind does, my answer is no. Is it possible to control the entire thinking part of the mind, or all decisions that the mind makes? I think not, and if so, why? I see no reason to do such. I avoid the term mind control because the entire mind cannot be controlled, and I wish to prevent a possible misunderstanding. I do not want anybody to think that I am addressing the mind as a whole in this presentation. Thus, I will not be using the term mind control. Thought control. Other than mind control, the term thought control identifies particular thoughts, not all thoughts, and by no means the entire mind. Thus, unlike mind control, the term thought control is territorial, meaning it is subject-orientated. It is possible to be brainwashed in more than one subject, which is often the case, but not in all subjects. The term thought control is the best term for what I am about to explain. So, I will be using the term thought control in my presentation. Brainwashing. The term brainwashing came from a reporter back in the 1950s. He had noticed that a group of POWs had dramatically changed their political views during their captivity. Their old cherished political views had been washed away and replaced with new views. Thus he created the term brainwashing. Actually, brainwashing would fall under thought control because it identifies one of the reasons for resorting to a thought control process, this being to change what somebody believes. Although the term brainwashing was originally used to describe processes that successfully change people's minds, today most people understand brainwashing as thought control in general. The washing out and replacing part has faded out. The term brainwashing is both widespread and has clarity. Most people see brainwashing as thought control. Since the term brainwashing has become so popular, I also frequently use this term. So the terms that I will be using in my presentation are thought control and brainwashing. A word that closely relates to brainwashing is the word convincing. Like brainwashing, convincing is the attempt to get somebody to believe something. When trying to convince somebody, attempts to do such, the process, will stop when the goal has been reached. The goal being either, number one, when the individual believes, or number two, when enough information had been given to paint a picture of the subject at hand. Brainwashing, on the other hand, demands control. It demands that one believes, be it true or not. Unlike convincing, when brainwashing somebody, control or thought control is the goal, thus goes beyond the convincing stage. It does not stop. It is a never-ending story coming from a source that will profit by controlling one or more people. The mind's decision-making process. Now I will explain the mental process the mind uses when it makes its decisions. As previously indicated, as far as I know, this is new information. Knowledge of this process explains why brainwashing is effective and will hopefully help us in many other ways. In order to understand how the mind makes its decisions, first we need to have a basic understanding of how the mind stores information. To help you visualize that, I've got a screenshot here of some files in my computer, and you notice the files are by subject. Each group of information is a subject, is a different subject. So when I titled these different files or ordiners or subjects, files that we might find in the human mind. To take this a step farther, let's choose the subject of politics. Here I have two sub-subjects, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, and this could go on to another set of sub-files, and so on. So here I am attempting to display the human mind with these dots of different sizes. I am displaying the different files or subjects that the mind stores. We call this grouping. Subject politics would have a group, and subject religion would have a group. My wife, my child, and so on and so forth would be filed in the area, in the group, with the appropriate subject. To help clarify this, these groups, like we do in our computer, have subordiners or subfiles that divides that subject up even more. For example, if this is my child, then I would likely have in my mind two files under there, my child good, my child bad. And those two files, like we see here, would be usually different in size. Now, to help you visualize that, let's zoom in here just a little bit, and I've picked out one of these groups, and right here we're taking a look at the inside of that group. And I put a couple of dots in here with different sizes to represent that within this subject or this group, we have like sub-subjects or subfiles that has to do with this group or this subject. Like I said before, it could be my child good, my child bad, or it could be the group for politics. We might have one for the good things about the Democrats, bad things about the Democrats, good things about the Republicans, bad things about the Republicans. That has to do with that subject, that has to do with this group. So that's what it might look like inside there, just so that you can visually see what I'm trying to explain here. A short review is stored in groups, and these groups are separated by subject. When information comes in concerning a certain subject, it will be stored in the file that relates to that subject. So with that said, I hope that I have given you a picture how information is stored in the brain. So for the purpose of explaining the decision-making process that the mind uses when it makes its decisions, I'm going to strip this poor guy of all of his stored information, okay? And we're going to start from scratch, and we've got an empty mind here. So now let's give this guy some information, okay? Let's get something stored in his brain. So I'm putting out information. In this case, he's saying, I'm good and they're bad. So he's putting out this information, okay? And I'm showing how this enters the mind, eyes and ears, and then it hits the nervous system. And what we've got now is an impulse, and then the nerves carry that impulse to the section of the mind where it gets stored as a train of thought. We've got a specific size of information here. He comes back again. he adds more information to that, and it grows. When we receive more information and it gets stored to that train of thought, it's going to grow in size. That's the key thing I want you to see here. Now, if he just says that over and over again, I am good and they are bad, he keeps coming back and says that, this train of thought is not going to grow. In order for it to grow, new information must be added. Now, going into a little bit more detail here, because this is pretty important, what makes this grow and what does not make it grow. If I keep coming to you saying, I am good, they are bad, and that's it, and I come back by tomorrow or this evening and say, I am good and they are bad, like I said, this train of thought is not growing. But what is happening? What I am doing when I repeat the same information over again is I am helping you to remember that information. So we're in another book right there. I'm not actually building that train of thought up anymore so that it can compete with other train of thoughts, but I am helping you to remember that train of thought, and which is influential. Now, if I say to you, I am good and they are bad, and somebody else comes and says, that's right, he is good and they are bad, then it will grow. And the reason why it grows is because it's coming from another source. So that's a little bit complicated, but I hope you understand that. Repeating does not cause a train of thought to grow. It will help you to remember it, but that is it. If another source repeats the same information, then it gets fed again. But in general, the act of repeating is not a very high. A lot of people think that repeating the same thing over again has a lot to do with brainwashing, but a good brainwasher will not put too much emphasis on this tactic because the brainwasher is not reaching his main goal with this tactic. All he's really doing is helping the person remember what he's saying, which is helpful, but it's not really accomplishing what he really needs. The key factor that has to occur is that the train of thought needs to grow.
Now, do understand, I've got this image here of a guy, could be a preacher, could be a politician or whatever, that this source of the information could be anything.
So here in this slide, I am displaying a single train of thought that has been stored in the mind.
So it's standing there all alone, so actually the decision-making process is not active here. Now this guy has received some other information that has to do with the same subject. This information contradicts the other information that he has. This train of thought contradicts this train of thought. They both cannot be true. So it gets stored separately, as we see right here. That's another train of thought.
Within the same subject.
Now the decision-making process is active, but it's confused. Now, I want to make it clear, you see that both of these trains of thought are the same size. The poor guy can't decide between one another. Somebody said something about somebody being a liar, and somebody else showed up and said, no, that somebody's not a liar. I've marked this T and F here for truthful information and false or fictional information. Now, you and I know that, but this guy doesn't, okay? So it's got this train of thought and it has this train of thought. Now, when the mind stores a train of thought, it just stores it. It does not put a label on it, truthful or fictional, like I have here. It's just got two trains of thought that conflict each other. So let's leave this poor guy in this state of mind here, in a state of confusion. Let's give him some additional information one way or the other so he can make a decision. So now we've, in some form or another, we've pumped some more information into him that relates to this train of thought. So it's stored here, and this train of thought grows. Now we have more information here than we do here. So the decision-making process is active, and what it's going to choose is this train of thought, because there's more information. The decision-making process is going by size, the amount of information. This information grew, this information did not.
Now, I'm using this little light bulb right here to display which train of thought decision-making process is deciding on.
Okay, now I'm going to explain something about what I just told you here. We got our buddy here. I've got two trains of thought. One is truthful and one is fictional. Normally in life, as the saying goes, a lie has short legs. Some say a lie has no legs, meaning it's going to die out soon. Now, that saying is a very good description of what I'm going to demonstrate right here. Usually that's true, and this is why. Now, normally in life, we encounter more truthful information than we do fictional information. So concentrate on these dashes right here. Each dash represents information that supports this train of thought, which is a truthful train of thought. So here we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bits of information that's coming in. As it comes in, it's building up this truthful information that the mind is going to choose when it makes its decisions. And with the fictional information we see here, that boom, 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 4 times in the same period of time, it's going to grow, but it's going to stay behind the truthful train of thought. In general, we make the right decisions and we make it through life. Now, I can't iterate how important this is, because when this information, let me go to the next slide here, I've turned it around. Now the fictional information is coming in at a rapider rate than the truthful information. The fictional train of thought is growing faster than the truthful one, and it's bigger. Now the mind, the decision-making process in the mind, is deciding this train of thought to be true. The decisions that it makes, it's going to be according to that. So I'm going to go back here. I'm talking about not just making mistakes, I'm talking about also survival here. As long as this is happening, we're staying in reality. And it's important that we stay in reality to a pretty high degree in order to survive. And of course, that's going to determine quality of life and everything else. Now, when this happens, you're being lied to. These lies, they're making up information. The common name today is fake news. They're putting it out there. You're not sure what's fake news is not. We're talking about a subject you don't know a whole lot about. And organization or whatever is pumping out this fictional information at a much faster rate than this one. And I'm going to have you basing your decisions on that right there. That's what the mind's decision-making process is going to be deciding for. In other words, it's a rat race. Let me go back here. I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say your child that's the subject drugs. And I have been using brainwashing to prevent children from turning to drugs. And I've noticed that some parents unknowingly have been doing it too. And that has been happening in society here and there. Now, when it comes to the subject of drugs, the child gets information, truthful information about drug abuse and so on and so forth, not to do it and stuff, okay? So if the rhythm of that truthful information, bang, 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 is keeping this train of thought, in other words, the child that decides not to mess with drugs, the child's going to go that way. There's some other factors involved, but this is a big one. Now, he's going to have his buddies and stuff that's going to say, oh, come on, man, it's okay. Look, I've done it. I'm okay. This fictional information about it being okay is coming in at a slower rate. So this child's going to be good. At least the probability of him being good is strongly increased. However, if this information is not as fast, this repeating, this machine gun effect, this rat race, the truth falls behind, and this train of thought increases in size and overcomes this one. It gets bigger than that one. Then the child is prone to turn to drug abuse. His buddies are coming and saying, it's okay, you do it, it's cool. feels good, and so on and so forth. All that information piling up, more sources, everything else. And that's beating out that. And you're going to have a child that's prone to doing drugs.
To help clarify this, to give you something that you can relate to, with this example, our buddy here is a young child, and we put some fictional information into this young child's mind. Let's tell him about Santa Claus, or we can use the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or whatever. So we've got our young child here, and we put this piece of information in here. We tell them that there's a Santa Claus and what Santa Claus does, that he brings gifts and so on and so forth. And this is fictional information, so we put this information in the child's mind, and it's stored. So there is no contradicting information, so the child is believing that. They now believe in Santa Claus. More information about Santa Claus comes in. They visit Grandma and Grandpa, and they tell something about Santa Claus from their perspective. The child goes to school, hears it from other kids. So we've got this fictional information growing. In this next slide, I'm basically demonstrating the same thing. This fictional information is coming in at a rapid rate. All kinds of supporting information concerning Santa Claus. And Mom and Dad comes up with some neat little tricks to fool you, to keep believing in Santa Claus. And you do. And in the background, there's truthful information about Santa Claus coming in. So we've got this information coming in, but it's slower than the fictional information. So as long as that is happening, the child is believing in Santa Claus. Now, I am showing you that new fictional information is no longer coming. You've got this same old repeated stuff. There's nothing new coming in. So now, nothing more is causing this to grow. It's staying the same size. Truthful information.
For example, you never really catch this guy in the act, and you see things like wrapping paper in Mom and Dad's bedroom in the closet, or other little things. You catch Grandma wrapping a present, or you notice that wrapping paper sold in the stores.
New information supporting the truth keeps on coming in. Like this keeps on trickling in there at whatever pace it's hitting. So now we got the fictional information that has come to a standstill. Nothing new is coming in to make it grow. It's just the same old story, the same old information being repeated. So it doesn't grow anymore. And the truthful information, as stated, is moving in there and causing that to grow. So, and it does grow. And then it hits the point where the size of this information is the same as the fictional information. The size of the truthful information is the same as the fictional information. And now, when the changeover occurs, the state of confusion that's there, it could be for a short period of time or a longer period of time. It's going to depend on when that extra information containing the truth hits the spot. Truth keeps coming in. The truthful information, the size of the truthful information is now larger than the fictional information. And now, decision-making process of the child is choosing the truthful information, and the child has realized at this time that it was just a game, it was not true, and the child has now realized that Santa Claus doesn't really exist. So, like I said, this could be the story of the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, different cultures, different fairy tales that get told. This is how it works, where you believe it for a period of time, and then the next step is you're starting to think, is that true? And you're in a state of confusion, and then the truth keeps moving its way in there at its rhythm, whatever rhythm it is hitting, and then you come to that point that you realize the Santa Claus stories were fictional. But I hope that you can identify with that in your own childhood there, and so that you can better realize what I'm saying here.
Something else to realize about the stage of confusion.
be it destructive brainwashing or constructive brainwashing. When the brainwasher is trying to overcome an unwanted train of thought, a state of confusion will generally be noticeable. This indicates that the process is on the road to success. To the left, I am showing that the act of overcoming an unwanted train of thought is a three-step or a three-stage process. If no contradicting train of thought exists, a stage of confusion will not occur. This is more common among young children. In this case, we have a one-step or one-stage process. So I want to make something else clear here. When we've got this situation going on where fiction is hitting an individual at a faster rate than the truth, and fictional information is growing, as I stated, this person is drifting away from reality. Okay, now you cannot feel this. This is not something that you can feel when this is happening and you start drifting away from reality farther and farther as this grows. This individual is going to be completely and thoroughly convinced that they're on the right path. Is what is happening here is we're playing a very dangerous game with insanity. When this fictional information takes over too much, and this guy is way out there in left field, he's lost it, okay? We're talking about insanity. Many of us have seen it happen. I'm not going to go into the details because I'll be attacking some political party or some religious group, and that's it's not the goal of this presentation. Everybody needs to find out themselves where's reality and where's not. I'm just trying to help you find that way yourself. I'm not going to decide that for you. But please take this very serious here, because there's a point right here. There's a point of no return. When this happens too much, we're going to have problems. We're going to have, and it's often groups of people, even large groups of people. We've had some political groups do some very crazy things, some religious groups do some very crazy things. It's a big problem. I can't say that enough. Okay, I hope that you've got a real good picture of this right here.
Short and sweet, the train of thought that gets fed the most with information is the winner. When you have conflicting train of thoughts, the one that's being fed the most is going to win. If there is not a conflicting train of thought, then it's going to win anyhow. Okay, there's no decisions to be made.
So far, I have been explaining how a train of thought gets fed when the source of information is coming from an external source. From external information, I mean information that was coming from outside the brain or the mind, like you can see here in this slide. Now I will explain how a train of thought gets fed from an internal source. To explain, I will use megabytes with initials MB to demonstrate the size of a train of thought, the same unit of measure we use to determine the size of a file in our computers. Here we've got our buddy again. All these dots are representing all of his trains of thoughts. Of course, there would be a lot more. Each of these dots or each of these files or subjects have a different size, as I have previously explained. For the purpose of explaining, I have faded out all other trains of thought, have left two trains of thought. These two trains of thought are two different files, two different subjects. One train of thought has absolutely nothing to do with the other train of thought. They're stored separately. They are not conflicting. They are not competing. One has nothing to do with the other. I'm using these two green circles here to demonstrate that this is a subject or a file, and this is a subject or a file. Two completely different files or subjects. When this train of thought or subject or file is active, then the mind's decision-making process will be focused on this file or this subject. It will not be focused on any other subjects, like this subject over here. Now, in this slide, I am demonstrating this train of thought feeding this train of thought. Now, as I said, we've got two completely different subjects here. Why does it do that? and how does it do that? Why would this train of thought transfer information over to this train of thought? What's basically being demonstrated here is a copy. Like I tell you something, this train of thought is telling this train of thought, adding to this train of thought. Then this happens. After it has made its transfer from information to this train of thought, this was 1 megabyte, you add the 5 megabytes at that, now it jumped to 6 megabytes. The question is what makes this happen? Why does it happen? How does it happen? In this slide, I'm going to demonstrate this process. Now, I got to explain this little guy right here. The mind has an operator that sort of regulates everything. That's what this little guy is right here. So what I've got here is an external information that's coming in. And it's hitting the mind's operator right here, and the operator has the assignment of relating that to stored information. The whole time we're talking about a certain subject, so the mind's operator has got this activated right here. I'm demonstrating that with that star. And somewhere in this information that's coming in, there's some information that relates to another subject. We're going to say this one. So the mind's operator is then waking this guy up over here and saying, hey, give this train of thought the information that you have. It's like I'm telling you, he's telling him. So when that happens and this transfer takes place, this information feeds this, and it's not coming from me, so that's why it's internal. It's being fed over here. So that's internal, but it's being activated because of an external happening. So what happens is this right here. You see, we had 1 megabyte right there. When that transfer occurs, and this guy tells, when this train of thought tells this train of thought what it's got, from 1 megabyte jumps up to 6 megabyte. If you can tap on information that has previously been stored in somebody's mind, you can speed up your process tremendously. And in order to tap on previously stored information, you need to relate that information with the subject you're talking about. It's a big time saver. I've noticed when I've been trying to pull an individual out of destructive brainwashing, they're just not in reality anymore on a specific subject. I've recognized that sometimes when I tap into previously stored information, it's like bang. I just said a sentence or two, I just made a tremendous success. Generally, you can recognize when that happens. You're thinking you've got a real hard cookie right here, and then you're able to tap on some previously stored information, and that gets transferred over into what you're talking about, and bang, you've succeeded. You've managed to move, it might be a massive amount of information over into the train of thought you're trying to feed. This is a good to know thing in the thought control process. I do hope that I was able to explain that good enough so that you understand. In this slide, all I'm really doing is I'm adding another element here. Here's my 1 megabyte. This is the active subject with the star I'm showing that. That's what we're talking about. And then I've got this information stored over here that has nothing to do with this. Where my goal is going to be to get this train of thought, some more information, so that it's going to beat out this train of thought. This next slide, then, I'm displaying the same thing again, because this is the train of thought we're talking about. I'm putting out information, and I'm trying to put something in there that's going to relate what I'm talking about with something else that's been stored in the mind, so that the mind will do this function that I explained before and transfer information over there to give me some help. So same thing again, only in this case, I've got some competition, and I want to get, I want to be out that 3 megabyte train of thought. If I did my job right, then that information was transferred over. Now, as you can see, 5 megabyte, but now we've got 6 megabyte. Now we've got practically doubled the information over here, and I did that in a very short period of time. And now the decision-making process is deciding for this train of thought, and I've accomplished my goal.
Common tactics used in a thought control process.
As stated, thought control is a process. This process consists of a number of tactics. In this phase of my presentation, I will explain some common tactics so you can get a feeling of what is going on. The main goal of a thought control process is to increase the flow of information that will feed a wanted train of thought and to stop or slow down the flow of information that will feed an unwanted train of thought. All of the following tactics are designed to help reach this goal. And here I've just got a picture of that. This train of thought, the wanted train of thought, the information is moving in there at a high rate, and at least at a higher rate than the unwanted information. If you're able to accomplish this, doesn't matter who's right, who's wrong. If you want to control somebody's thoughts, this is the goal you need to reach. The reinforcement tactic. Reinforcement. Sometimes I like to call it the never-ending story. This tactic is always present and the easiest way of recognizing the use of a thought control process. When judging a source of information, if this tactic is not present, then a thought control process is not active. Now, I am emphasizing this because a lot of people are claiming that a thought control or a brainwashing process is there when it is not. A thought control process will, number one, create a train of thought and build it up, or number two, take an existing train of thought and build it up. If the brainwasher cannot physically confine or separate their followers from the rest of the world, then they will need to constantly build up the train of thought they want to succeed so that it will beat out the competing train of thoughts, the arguments. I call this reinforcement. If I was a brainwasher, and this is the train of thought that I want to succeed, I'm going to have to keep on feeding that train of thought. I'm going to have to keep on coming up with new information and feed this train of thought so that it will grow, especially if I'm lying to you, because old man truth never sleeps. He may be slower than me, but if I stop, he's going to catch up with me. Now, that doesn't mean that a brainwasher is always a liar, but in order to maintain this control that I want to have over you as a brainwasher, then I can't let it rest. It's a never-ending story. I need to keep pumping. I need to keep this train of thought growing, and any other arguments to that train of thought is my competition. Now, an exception to this policy is if I can completely confine you, like lock you up in a room by yourself. By doing that, then your only information would be coming from me. There would be no arguments or contradicting information getting to you. Thus, this act of pumping, or what I call reinforcement, or the never-ending story, would not be necessary. So that's why we have this never-ending story and this continuously pumping, in which I call reinforcement. Okay, we have two sources of information here, and each source is using a different tactic. So let's look at Mary Sue over here. Now, this could be one individual or a group of individuals. This thought leader is putting out information on a subject for a period of time, may test you, then stops. The topic is closed, and you move on. The flow of information from this thought leader concerning the subject at hand stops. For example, when you take a course, the subject is closed when you pass the course. This thought leader is informing people, but is not trying to control people. Let's look at Billy Bob over here. And like I say, this could be one individual or a group. This thought leader keeps pumping their followers with information on the same subject. The flow of information from this thought leader never stops. It's like a never-ending story. This is clear-cut control. This thought leader is trying to control people's thoughts. By controlling what people think or believe, you control what they do. Political parties and religious leaders are known for using this tactic. Billy Bob may be adding more tactics to it, and he probably will, he is definitely seeking control over those taking in the information he is putting out. Billy Bob knows that if he stops, he will lose followers, especially if he is misleading people. Does this make Billy Bob the bad guy? No, it doesn't. For example, if Billy Bob is doing it to shy our youth away from drug abuse. However, if he is doing it to make people believe in things that cannot be proven, to make theories seem like facts, or to make lies seem true, then he is likely in it for personal gain instead of trying to help people. Note, brainwashing or thought control is extremely effective at making lies seem true. Okay, here we have two different methods of hiring somebody for a job. And again, I'm going to use Mary Sue and Billy Bob for this example. Now, Mary Sue or Billy Bob and their audience here, that could be one individual or several individuals or a lot of individuals. So Mary Sue is seeking employment at a local business. She submits a resume. The employers review the resume. If one of the best, she goes in for an interview that may include a debate. The employers make a choice. End of subject. Here there is no reinforcement, no pumping, no prolonged or never-ending story. A thought control or brainwashing process is not active. This is the favored way of hiring somebody because it is very effective. Generally, the most qualified person wins. So over here we got Billy Bob again, and same token, could be one, could be a lot of people, but in this case, it would be a lot of people actually. Billy Bob is seeking employment as a politician. He wants to be the President of the United States. He spends years pumping information into the employers, the voters. Every day, he pumps them full of more information. Here we have reinforcement, the endless pumping of information. Thus, a thought control process is active. Brainwashing is extremely effective. When competing, if one resorts to it, the others must also. If not, they will surely lose. The result is the best brainwasher wins. Much too often, not the best individual for the job. Reinforcement is the heart of brainwashing. If the reinforcement tactic is absent, a brainwashing process is not active. All other tactics in a brainwashing process are there so that the reinforcement tactic can be carried out. Confinement and slandering tactics. Physical confinement is the best way of controlling which train of thought gets fed. If physical confinement is not feasible, and usually it is not, then the next best tactic is the slandering tactic because it creates a form of mental confinement. In addition, slandering will promote loyalty. In other words, victims remain victims. Note, the slandering tactic promotes feelings of hate. Thus, this is the most dangerous of all tactics. I will explain. The slandering tactic is unnecessary when brainwashing somebody. However, it dramatically increases the success rate when competing with others. The slandering tactic is helpful in two ways. Number one, it promotes loyalty because it promotes feelings of mistrust, dislike, and even hate towards those thinking differently. It leads people to believe that those thinking differently are stupid, bad, evil, dangerous, and so on, depending on what is being insinuated. Thus, the brainwashed individual will tend to ignore or not take those thinking differently seriously. This is a mental block, a mental wall, and a good substitute when physical confinement is not feasible. Number two, it is also bad news. Thus, like the bad news tactic, it draws people's attention and pulls them in so that a thought control process can be carried out. Instinctively, we are drawn to bad news. This is our natural defense system at work. The slandering tactic is extremely dangerous to both the brainwashed victims and those thinking differently, the outsiders. The often unwanted side effect of this tactic is the visualization of monsters that do not exist. The feeling of fear, dislike, and even hate that often leads to violent acts on innocent people. The feeling of fear, dislike, and hate that are generated by the use of this tactic are often unwanted. However, there are those that do not care. History has shown us how effective the slandering tactic is. History has also shown us how horrifying it is. The problem is that if one uses it, the other must when competing. If not, the one not using it will surely lose. By intensifying the slandering, the brainwasher is promoting success. In order to succeed, each brainwasher will try to outdo the other. Thus, the slandering is step-by-step intensified. What we have is a devil's circle, an evil and vicious spiral that often leads to people senselessly killing each other. Confinement, in other words, separation from the arguments, is a very effective tactic when resorting to a thought control process. If you lock somebody in a room, and the only information they get is from you, then you are blocking information that could change their train of thought. Thus, they are usually easier to brainwash. The same token goes when a brainwasher slanders those thinking differently. By doing such, the brainwasher is convincing his followers to see those thinking differently as terrible beings or the problem. Thus, he is promoting the probability that his followers will start blocking out information from those thinking differently, be it truthful or not. Be it physical confinement or mental confinement, both are effective. Mental confinement through the use of the slandering tactic is more popular because physically confining people is generally not feasible. So just to help you visualize what I'm just said about the confinement, in this I'm displaying a physical confinement. We've got the individual, and these lines here are representing walls. And it could be I've got him locked up in a room or some kind of an institution or whatever. Reverend Jim Jones, for those of you that know that case, he took his people down to South America in the jungle and built a fortress down there and kept them inside the fortress, only feeding them information that he wanted them to have. So at any rate, this is representing physical confinement. We've got the individual in a wall in an enclosed fortress or room. The only information he's to get is what has been being generated inside the facility, as we see here. And a lot of times it's going to be fictional information that's being put out. So I'm representing that inside those four walls, fictional information is going out. And we see the fictional information being pumped here, and that the fictional train of thought is growing, and that the decision-making process is deciding for this train of thought. And here we can see the truth outside of the walls. It's not getting in. So the truthful train of thought is not growing. So we have the situation that we want to take control of their thoughts. And as stated, when you take control of their thoughts, then you're taking control of their behavior. In this slide here, the wall is not there, and what I've got here is I've made that wall inside the person. This is the effect that you're going to have when the slandering tactic is being used. We've got information hitting the person. Okay, there's no wall there. It's getting to the individual, but the individual is blocking off the information that I, as the brainwasher, does not want him to have. Again, I'm pumping him. The information that I'm giving him, he's accepting, and it's feeding that train of thought. It is growing. And the information that I do not want him to receive is mentally being blocked. So, again here, I'm reaching my goal with the use of the slandering tactic. Now, of course, probably needless to say, the confinement, the physical confinement would work better than the mental confinement. But it is very effective, and as I stated before, the physical confinement is usually not feasible. How would you finance it? How would you do it legally? This is the substitute to that, to physical confinement is this form of mental confinement. Again, coming from the slandering tactic, it is very effective. The people that use it are going to show more success than people that don't use it. However, it has side effects, as mentioned before, that are very ugly, that we don't want. The visualization of monsters that don't exist. I can't emphasize this enough. It's a very, very nasty tactic, and if you are someplace and you see this tactic, if some individual, be a politician or a preacher or whatever, that is utilizing this tactic, I strongly suggest to get the heck out of there. You may be heading to something very dangerous, and your life might be in danger. Things of interest tactic. A brainwasher must pull people in and get their undivided attention to carry out the reinforcement tactic. Things of interest help to get this job done. This can be things like bad or alarming news, politics, religion, famous people, large buildings, hobbies, gangs, attractive men and women, sex, money, firearms, and the list goes on as far as the imagination. If a brainwasher is seeking a lot of followers, he needs to pick popular things of interest. A big one is alarming news, often referred to as bad news. Brainwashers favor the bad news tactic because everybody is interested in alarming or bad news. Since the use of the bad news tactic is so widespread and effective, I will comment on this tactic.
The term bad news has become popular. However, what we are actually addressing here is alarming news. People are instinctively drawn to alarming news. It is our natural defense system at work. To brainwash people, you need to get their undivided attention, and you need to convince them to keep returning for more information. The bad or alarming news tactic is an effective way of reaching this goal. If I tell people something that alarms them and advise them to keep coming back for updates, then I am promoting the probability that they will keep coming back. And I am promoting the probability that I will have their undivided attention. When competing against others for followers, if the brainwasher does not have enough truthful, bad, or alarming news, then the brainwasher will create such news. Today, this is often referred to as fake news. This tactic has infested today's news media. Today, if a media wants the most followers or viewers, it must come up with the most bad, or better said, alarming news, much of which will likely be fake news. The bad news tactic often walks hand in hand with the slandering tactic because slandering is also a form of bad or alarming news. Again, here we have the visualization of monsters that do not exist, people thinking that things are worse than they actually are.
As I have hopefully made clear by now, to take control and maintain control over people, a brainwasher must ensure that their train of thought, in this case, train of thought A, gets fed more than an opposing train of thought, in this case, train of thought B. That means the brainwasher must get people's attention and must keep pulling people back in to reach this goal. Bad news is very effective at reaching both of these goals. One-way communicating tactic. Sometimes I like to call it the one-way street. One-way communicating, or the I talk, you listen tactic. The thought leader avoids questions and open discussion. It is like a one-way street. If Mary Sue does nothing but talk and Billy Bob does nothing but listen, then who will likely change their mind? Obviously, it will be Billy Bob. Be it right or wrong, everybody on the street is heading the same way, and that is the way the thought leader wants them to go. Some examples are preaching, lecturing, TV and radio, flyers, pamphlets, newspapers, books, films, videos, the act of giving a speech, and so on. With this tactic, the brainwasher deters information that could feed an unwanted train of thought. Questions and open discussions are dangerous for the brainwasher trying to mislead people. When presented with questions and open discussion, the brainwasher trying to mislead people will seek ways to deter questions and comments that could feed a truthful train of thought. The thought leader that avoids questions and comments that could endanger their control over their people is trying to mislead people. Such a thought leader wants people to refrain from weighing out the possibilities. Be advised that forms of one-way communication are essential in our society because they are a fast way to inform people. They are time savers. When open discussion is present, much more time is required to deliver needed information. Thus, to a degree, questions and open discussion must be left out. The thought leader trying to mislead people will exaggerate this. In general, they will always, or nearly always, avoid questions and open discussion. By avoiding questions and open discussion, the thought leader or the brainwasher is ensuring that the wanted train of thought will be fed and that the unwanted train of thought will not be fed. Now, as stated, everybody that is giving a lecture or a speech is not trying to mislead people. It's a big time saver, and if they got a lot of information that they got to get out there, the time is short. You just got to avoid open discussion and questions. Good way of telling if a thought leader is trying to mislead you is when it's excessive. If they're doing it all the time, it's just exaggerated. They're not giving people time to question. They're not allowing open discussion at all. That's a pretty good signal that they're lying to you. I've got the F and the T here again for fictional and truthful information. Then they're probably trying to feed a fictional train of thought, and they're going up against the truth, and they're trying to deter any information that is going to feed a truthful train of thought. The truthful thought leader is going to welcome open discussion and questions as much as possible, and the thought leader that's trying to misguide people is going to try to avoid questions and open discussion as much as possible. Now, another reason that a dishonest thought leader will avoid questions and open discussion is that lying is complicated. The act of open discussion or questions gets them confused. They make mistakes then. The interrupting tactic. Interrupting, perhaps better said, repeated inappropriate interrupting. By constantly interrupting those thinking differently, the brainwasher is preventing people from hearing arguments or ideas that may be better than theirs. In order to make a good decision, the mind needs to receive and understand the arguments. By blocking the arguments, the brainwasher is blocking information they do not want people to hear. As previously stated, the goal of a brainwasher or brainwashers is to increase the flow of information they want you to hear, be it true or not, as seen here with train of thought A, and reduce or stop the flow of information that they do not want people to hear, be it true or not, as seen with train of thought B. Interrupting the arguments helps the brainwasher achieve that goal. This tactic is helpful to brainwashers during events like open discussions and debates. The ignoring and avoiding tactic. Moving on to another tactic, ignoring and avoiding. The ignoring and avoiding tactic is especially interesting for the brainwasher trying to mislead people. By ignoring and avoiding questions and comments from people thinking differently, the brainwasher is blocking questions and comments that could endanger the brainwasher's goal. The same token goes, as the brainwasher, I need to feed the train of thought I want to grow, and I need to slow down or stop any questions or comments that would feed the train of thought I do not want to grow, as seen here. The ignoring and avoiding tactic is by all means a helpful tool for a brainwasher, especially if the brainwasher is trying to mislead people. Take up people's free time tactic. People's free time is dangerous for a brainwasher, especially the brainwasher trying to mislead people. For example, people tend to use their free time to talk about things like politics and religion. By taking up people's free time, the brainwasher reduces the probability that unwanted information from outsiders, in other words, people thinking differently, will get to his people. By taking up people's free time, the brainwasher is preventing unwanted information from getting to his people. This deters the possibility that an unwanted train of thought, in this case likely a truthful train of thought, will be fed. Now, the brainwasher may or may not use this tactic to feed the train of thought he wants to feed. In other words, he may not use this time to preach to his people, but by taking his people's free time, he is successfully detering the possibility that his people will come in contact with information that could feed an unwanted train of thought. As stated, in this case, the unwanted train of thought will likely be a truthful train of thought. So he is reaching his goal. Beware of thought leaders who are trying to block contradicting information, in other words, the arguments, because often they are trying to mislead people. Moving on to the pretending tactic. The brainwasher is pretending to be somebody he is not. The brainwasher is playing up to a group of people by pretending he is one of them. The brainwasher is seeking a lot of followers or supporters, so he picks out a large group of people, for example Christians, and plays up to them by pretending to be one of them. Is your religious leader religious? Is the politician that you are supporting religious? Are they who they claim to be? Or are they an impostor pulling you over the table? At any rate, this happens more than people think. The pretending tactic is effective, thus popular. But why is it effective? Well, this is why. Religious groups are known for disliking and even hating those who have not been led to believe as they believe. Why? Because religious thought leaders often resort to the slandering tactic. They frequently slander those who have encountered reasons or information not to believe them, the so-called non-believers or outsiders. As previously explained, the slandering tactic causes people to distrust, dislike, or even hate those thinking differently. Thus, they tend not to follow or support those thinking differently. So as a non-Christian politician looking for supporters in the United States, pretending to be a Christian will get you more supporters. Here again I'm displaying the effect of the slandering tactic in this diagram. Let us say this guy belongs to a religious cult that is resorting to the slandering tactic. That means he is likely mentally blocking outsiders and accepting insiders, as I am displaying here in this diagram. Let us say that a political leader is seeking to brainwash this guy in politics so he can get his support. And let us say that the political leader is non-religious, thus he is an outsider to this guy. When effectively pretending to be an insider, the political leader will be seen as an insider. As an insider, he increases the probability that he will be able to plant a train of thought in this individual's mind and feed it so that it will grow, as seen here in this diagram. As an outsider, the possibility of accomplishing this is strongly reduced because chances are he will be blocked, as seen here. So, as a non-religious brainwasher needing support from a religious group of people who has been exposed to the slandering tactic, pretending to be one of them will, by all means, show more success. When trying to brainwash somebody, the pretending tactic is by all means an effective tool. Note, the pretending tactic is also used by people that are simply seeking their peace and quiet, not just brainwashers. For example, throughout history, religious people have been known for attacking people merely because they were thought to be outsiders. This is because religious leaders frequently resort to the slandering tactic. The result is people pretending to be religious so that they can live in peace. The use of distinctive cult markings tactic. Brainwashers often influence their followers to mark themselves in ways others will see. This can be something simple like a marked hat, or more complicated like a complete uniform or clothing standard. To get the best effect, the markings should be visible and easily seen. Why do certain brainwashers influence their people to mark themselves? For one, it tells the brainwasher that he has gained a higher degree of control over the individual. However, the more significant reason is when people see cult markings on an individual, they will tend to avoid presenting arguments, especially if the cult is known for getting upset with those thinking differently. The arguments. Brainwashers that resort to this tactic are likely misleading their followers and trying to hide them from the truth. A good leader or a teacher will influence his people to seek the truth in the arguments, not the opposite. Let's say that our buddy here is displaying markings of a misled political cult. The markings tell others that he belongs to a cult that has been influenced by a political brainwasher that resorts to the slandering tactic. Thus, this cult is known for blocking outside information, the arguments, and it is known for attacking those thinking differently, the outsiders. First, as an outsider trying to present arguments to this guy, you will probably be blocked, as seen here. Second, once this guy sees you as an outsider, one of the monsters he is visualizing, he may attack you. This causes people to shy away from presenting arguments. Thus, by marking his people, the brainwasher is deterring truthful information from getting to his people. The rewarding and punishing tactic. Frequently, brainwashers or cults will resort to some form of a reward and punishment system. Generally, such is based on one's loyalty to the cult. One thing that brainwashers usually require is your attendance at their meetings. This is so that they can carry out the reinforcement tactic, which I previously explained. Also, as previously stated, this will be a never-ending story. It is like a class you never graduate from. For example, something I have frequently experienced. As a follower, supporter, and believer, in other words, an insider, you are treated as a friend, a family member, or a loved one. Typically, friendship is earned, but cults often give friendship. As long as you give them what they want from you, you will likely be treated like a dear friend or even a brother or sister. We all want friends. Thus, this easily earned friendship is like a magnet pulling people in, especially those who have a hard time making friends. If you are not doing as wanted, you may find cult members getting upset with you or pressuring you. This will not be because you have suddenly become a bad or unfriendly person. It will be because you are not following the cult's requirements. For example, you are not attending cult meetings so that they can pump you with their information. If you have found out that the cult is lying to you and you leave the cult, in other words, you become an outsider, they may resort to more harsh forms of punishment like loss of friends, lies being told about you behind your back, in other words, slandering, unjustified attacks, even physical attacks, terrorizing, and so on. Again, this will not be because you have suddenly become a bad or unlikable person. You are the same person you have been. It will be because you left the cult. Note, brainwashers or cults frequently need supporters more than supporters need brainwashers. Thus, forgiveness will tend to be based on the cult's need or desire for supporters instead of the intensity and frequency of any bad behavior. No matter how bad you were, you will probably be forgiven, especially if you are funding them or in some way or form giving them what they want or need. Rewards and punishment will tend to be based on one's support for the cult or cult leader. Forgiveness will tend to be based on the cult's need or desire for supporters. This tactic promotes loyalty. It pulls in people, especially people who are outcasts, lonely, or have problems making friends. And it pressures those who have left to return. Note, some brainwashers or cults will use such rewards but will not resort to such harsh punishments. They stay friendly, hoping to pull people back in by staying friendly. It depends on what the brainwasher thinks will work. Needless to say, the brainwasher that resorts to this tactic is probably misleading people. As stated, the thought leader or brainwasher that resorts to the reward and punishment tactic is probably misleading people. So this diagram paints the best picture of what is happening. As displayed here, the fictional train of thought is being fed more than the truthful train of thought. By rewarding things like attendance, loyalty, and support, and punishing things like absence, disloyalty, and lack of support, people are being pressured to stay with the cult and take part in cult activities. Exactly there where the brainwashing is occurring, there where the fictional train of thought, in this case, is being fed. The rewarding and punishing tactic will, by all means, increase the probability that the desired train of thought gets fed. As stated, it will likely be a fictional train of thought in this case. Target the layman tactic. Thought control or brainwashing works best with those who know little or nothing about the subject the brainwasher is working with. Most people know little about science, thus they are easy prey to those who resort to a thought control process to mislead people in this area. Most people know little about politics, thus they are easy prey to those who resort to a thought control process to mislead people in this area. Young children know nothing, thus they are often a favored target for those resorting to a thought control process to mislead people. Try convincing a group of medical doctors and a group of car mechanics that COVID-19 does not exist. You will have more success with the car mechanics. Try convincing a group of medical doctors and a group of car mechanics that a gasoline engine will also run on glow plugs. You will have more success with the medical doctors. Thought leaders or brainwashers who are out to mislead people will concentrate on those who know little or nothing about the subject they are trying to deceive people in. For example, those who know little about science are more likely to fall victim to a far-fetched religious thought leader or brainwasher, or those who know little about politics are more likely to fall victim to a corrupt political thought leader or brainwasher. Needless to say, in both cases, that is most of us. As previously stated, old man truth tends to linger everywhere. Thus, normally a thought control process is unnecessary when sharing truthful information. The exception to this policy is when somebody resorts to a thought control process to mislead people in a harmful way. Then it becomes necessary to activate a thought control process to save people. By targeting the layman, you are making your job as a brainwasher easier. When using a thought control process to make lies seem true, the less the individual knows about the truth, the better. The dependency tactic. Friendship dependency. We all want friends, thus we have a degree of dependency on friendships. This is more intense for those who have a hard time making friends. Brainwashers or cults are known for working with this form of dependency, especially those misleading people. Financial dependency. Reverend Jim Jones, for those who know that case, talked his people out of their money, homes, and everything they had. Thus, they were entirely dependent on him financially. If you left him, you went with nothing. Cults can achieve dependency in many ways. They may work with money, drugs, sex, friendship, security, and so on. Be alert and use your imagination. Again, here you are being pulled in so that the reinforcement tactic can be carried out, so that the wanted train of thought will get fed, as seen here. The brainwasher who resorts to the dependency tactic is probably trying to mislead people. The savior tactic. A corrupt brainwasher will create a monster or monsters. In other words, will create an imaginary evil being or an evil doing. Then they will lead you to think that they are going to save you from this imaginary beast. In other words, they will lead their followers to see them as their savior. A corrupt brainwasher needs you, however, they will lead you to think that you need them. It is usually about money and or power. Such brainwashers will likely be resorting to fake bad news and probably slandering. Such brainwashers will frequently lead their followers to think they are succeeding when in reality they are not. If you are following a thought leader resorting to such tactics, be sure to do a lot of research and seek truth in the arguments before taking any action. Throughout history, countless numbers of people have been led to believe absurd, tall tales that in turn cause them to behave in harmful and evil ways. The brainwasher is telling alarming stories about an imaginary monster. The brainwasher is creating evidence making the imaginary monster seem real. The brainwasher creates success stories. Those who believe him and those who have not encountered or are blocking the truth will likely see the brainwasher as a savior. When people see the brainwasher as a savior, they will likely keep returning so that the reinforcement tactic can be carried out, and the train of thought that the brainwasher wants to feed is being fed, as displayed in this diagram. The use of fear tactic. The fear tactic may be used in two ways. Number one, fear of punishment from the brainwasher and or cult members for not doing what is expected. As previously stated, punishment for not doing what the brainwasher or the cult wants can be horrifying, especially if you find out that they are lying and you leave the cult. Number two, fear of the monsters that in reality do not exist. The brainwasher leads his people to fear those thinking differently. At the same time, the brainwasher is making his victims believe he is the savior, the one who is there to help them defeat the monsters. By making people fear punishment for not obeying or staying loyal to the cult, the brainwasher is pressuring people to stay with the cult and to do what is expected of them. Again, here, people are being pulled in so that the reinforcement tactic can be carried out. By causing people to visualize monsters and presenting himself as the savior, the brainwasher is causing people to stick with him and listen to him. Again, here, people are being pulled in so that the reinforcement tactic can be carried out. The act of repeating something over and over tactic. As previously stated, repeating the same information will not feed a desired train of thought, but will promote the probability that the individual will remember that train of thought. Memory also plays a vital role in the thought control process, simply because the mind does not use forgotten information. If the brainwasher gets others to repeat the same information, then the desired train of thought gets fed again, and it grows. People tend to start believing something when they hear it from different people. For example, when I tell a group of people a hard-to-believe story, some will likely believe the story and some will not. When I influence others to tell them the same story, then the number of people believing the story will increase. Okay, I have mentioned and explained several commonly used tactics so that you have a picture. The main thing to remember is that the reinforcement tactic is the heart of a thought control or brainwashing process. All other tactics are present to pull people in so that the reinforcement tactic can be carried out. If the reinforcement tactic is not present, then a thought control or brainwashing process is not active. As stated, many brainwashers will resort to brainwashing in order to make their lies seem true to their victims. Dishonest brainwashers resort to tactics that will separate their victims from the truth. For example, physical confinement and mental confinement. As previously explained, slandering promotes mental confinement. Both are good at blocking truthful arguments. Excessive use of one-way communications, for example, TV, radio, preaching, lecturing, reading materials. The act of passing on information without open discussion deters the probability that truthful information will surface. Interrupting deters the possibility that arguments will be heard, arguments that may contain truthful information. Ignoring and avoiding also deters the possibility that arguments will be heard, arguments that may contain truthful information. The act of taking up people's free time. People often come across truthful information in their free time. Distinctive cult markings. This causes people to shy away from presenting arguments to cult followers, arguments that may bring the truth to the surface. The act of rewarding and punishing cult followers. This pressures followers or members to do things like attend cult meetings so that the reinforcement tactic can be carried out, and not listening to outsiders so that the truth cannot come to surface. Such tactics effectively deter the possibility that cult followers or members will be exposed to arguments that may bring the truth to the surface. Beware of thought leaders resorting to such tactics. Racism. I'm going to add something before I continue to the next part of my presentation. Why is segregation the leading cause of racism? Confinement, segregation, and separation are closely related. I have previously explained the use of confinement. When you have confinement, you also have segregation and separation. When you separate blacks and whites, fantasies and tall tales tend to move in. Often bad news and slandering will soon be present and will tend to increase on both sides. Thus, a fictional train of thought is being fed. The mind is getting too much one-sided information, therefore we have a form of brainwashing. Put the blacks and whites back together, racism is reduced. Why? Because they are confronted with information that tells them what they thought was wrong. Thus, a truthful train of thought is being fed. Racism is the result of brainwashing, and the brainwashing is the result of the segregation. In this case, we do not have a brainwasher intentionally brainwashing people. This is the result of people's sensitivity and attraction to bad news. As stated, slandering is also a form of bad news. With this scenario, I am displaying how brainwashing can occur without an active brainwasher or thought leader. Needless to say, when it comes to racism, we also have the scenario in which racism is being preached. In other words, an active brainwasher is causing it. The brainwasher is slandering a group of people, for example, blacks, whites, refugees, immigrants, or whoever.
Now I'm going to talk to you about recognizing a victim of thought control. What are we looking for? We are looking for 4 things. Number 1, abnormal feelings. Number 2, abnormal behavior. Number 3, a thought leader resorting to a reinforcement process. And number 4, the above 3 will be limited to a specific subject or subjects, but not all subjects the individual is involved with. With other subjects, the individual will generally be normal. For example, a victim of religious brainwashing displays abnormal or senseless feelings and behavior regarding their involvement with religion, but with other subject areas, they act normal. The signs we are looking for will be related to the tactics the brainwasher is using. Some think that signs like fear or the visualization of monsters that do not exist are always present, but that is not the case. If the brainwasher is not resorting to tactics that cause fear, then such a sign or symptom is not to be expected, at least not from that brainwasher.
Some think that confusion is a sign of brainwashing, but this is also untrue. A brainwashed victim is never confused. They are always convinced. Confusion is sometimes a stage that one goes through when falling victim to brainwashing, and is usually noticeable when the victim is recovering. Confusion happens before and or after, but not during the period of mental control. Now I will present several popular tactics and explain what feelings and forms of behavior each tactic promotes. The reinforcement tactic. The main signs you are looking for are signs coming from the reinforcement tactic because, as previously stated, this is the only tactic that is always present. The individual is being exposed to too much one-sided information. The individual's thoughts and or actions are too extreme. The individual is overly convinced about something they know little about. The individual is showing signs of obsession and or fanatic behavior. The individual is exercising senseless rituals and practices. The individual has dramatically changed their beliefs, character, and or personality. The individual has lost the ability to take new arguments or suggestions seriously. The individual has been led to see theories as facts. For example, there are thousands of religious theories, but many followers of these religions see such theories as factual information. The willingness to lie or twist the truth to feed the wanted train of thought increases concerning the subject the brainwasher is working with. As stated, at the beginning of this presentation, although most see brainwashing and thought control as the same thing, actually there is a difference. Thought control is the act of controlling someone's thoughts in general. Brainwashing is the act of changing one's belief to another belief by using thought control. Brainwashing is the act of washing out one's beliefs and replacing them with new beliefs. For example, the Sioux Indians were spiritual people who believed in Wakantanka. After being preached to by Christian settlers for an extended period of time, they became Christians. Their old beliefs were washed away and replaced by new beliefs. A thought control process is used to brainwash somebody. The thing is that many thought leaders do not stop using thought control when brainwashing has occurred. In other words, when the individual changes their mind. They keep going and they keep going so that they can maintain their control over their victim or victims. With that said, when someone changes their points of view, it may be a sign that they are being exposed to a thought control process. Look to see if the individual is taking a course that comes to an end, or if they are involved with a thought leader resorting to the reinforcement tactic. In other words, the preaching keeps going. It is a never-ending story. If so, then we have an active thought control process and a victim or soon-to-be victim. If the thought leader is giving a course that one graduates from, in other words, the preaching ends in a specific period, then we do not have reinforcement. We do not have a thought control process geared to maintain control over people. Note, as previously stated, the reinforcement tactic must be active to gain control over people. This tactic alone will work. All other tactics are there to speed up and to strengthen the reinforcement tactic. Thus, signs of other tactics will generally accompany signs of the reinforcement tactic. Next tactic, the bad news or alarming news tactic. The individual is developing feelings of fear, depression, and or worry. In other words, we're talking about anxiety. An individual with anxiety disorders is likely struggling with intense and perhaps uncontrollable feelings of anxiety, like fear, worry, and or panic. This individual may be a danger to themselves and those around them. Warning: danger of physical harm and death. Use caution around victims of the bad news tactic. Although victims of this tactic are generally not as dangerous as victims of the slandering tactic, history has told us that they are frequently a danger to themselves and sometimes those around them. The slandering tactic. As with the bad or alarming news tactic, the individual is likely developing feelings of fear, depression, and or worry. As stated, we're talking about anxiety. In addition, the individual is likely to develop feelings of dislike, hate, anger, and or aggression toward those thinking differently. Look for withdrawal from people who think differently. They are likely blocking the arguments. The victim is likely struggling with intense and perhaps uncontrollable feelings of anxiety, meaning fear, worry, and or panic. In addition, feelings of anger, dislike, and hate, in which promotes violent behavior. Victims of the slandering tactic are frequently a danger to both themselves and those around them. And once again, warning: danger of physical harm and death. Use extreme caution around victims of the slandering tactic. Do not let them think that you are one of the monsters they are seeing. For those familiar with the Reverend Jim Jones case, Congressman Leo Ryan and most of his team, all non-professionals, were killed when visiting this religious cult. The big mistake was they displayed themselves as outsiders or non-believers, the monsters. This has been happening throughout history. Do not underestimate this. Note, my observations have told me that the use of bad news and slandering tactics has been increasing over time. Unfortunately, much of such news is fake news. This excessive use of bad or alarming fake information is causing people to see much of the world around them worse than it is in reality. This is often called the visualization of monsters that do not exist. However, it is officially called the mean world syndrome. My observations have told me that this massive use of alarming, bad, fake news to get followers is causing the mean world syndrome in pandemic proportions. Moving on to one-way communicating tactic. Preachers, newspapers, TV, radio, and so on. The individual is excessively exposing themselves to information sources that lack open discussion. This is generally harmless if the individual is at least equally and fairly exposing themselves to all sides of any conflicting trains of thought. However, it is still better when open discussion is at least occasionally added. Moving on to the interrupting tactic. The individual is interrupting the arguments. They are blocking. They do not want the arguments to surface. If this is not normal for this individual, and the individual is only doing it with the subject they have been brainwashed in, then we have an indicator that they have fallen victim. Generally, it is the brainwasher who uses this tactic, but victims sometimes adopt it. Monkey see, monkey do. And remember, brainwashed victims often become brainwashers themselves. Moving on to the ignoring and avoiding tactic. The individual is ignoring and avoiding the arguments. Again here, they are blocking. They want to avoid the arguments. If this is not normal for this individual is only doing this with the subject they have supposedly been brainwashed in, then we have an indicator that they have fallen victim. Again here, the brainwasher usually uses this tactic, but victims sometimes adopt it. As stated, monkey see, monkey do. And as stated, brainwashed victims often become brainwashers themselves. Moving on to the next tactic, take up people's free time tactic. The individual is giving their free time to a brainwasher or a thought leader. They may have sacrificed an enjoyable free time activity to have more time with a thought leader. The next tactic, the pretending tactic. The thought leader or brainwasher pretends to be something they are not. For example, a politician who pretends to be a Christian to get Christians to follow and support them. In this case, the victim is simply following and supporting somebody who is not what they claim to be. This leaves no signs or symptoms. The use of destructive cult markings. The individual publicly displays markings that identifies them as a member of a group of people or a cult. Such markings are often harmless. However, when used to shy off those thinking differently, or better said, what they have to say, meaning the arguments, then the arguments are being blocked, which is a sign of destructive brainwashing. The use of distinctive markings is popular among religious and political cults. Cult markings are a sign of deep-set control. Cult leaders who influence their people to mark themselves generally do not want outsiders presenting arguments to their people that could jeopardize their control over their people. Use caution. They may simply ignore you and walk away, or they may get violent. That will depend on how they are programmed and what tactics the brainwasher resorted to strengthen their thought control process. The next tactic, the reward and punish tactic. Here we are looking for unusual or uncalled for feelings of fear and pride that can lead to related behavior. A few examples. Fear of being punished for not attending meetings or leaving the cult. Fear of asking questions or making critical comments. Unreasonable fear of outsiders. The individual thinks that they are doing the right thing when in reality they are not. The individual feels a false sense of pride when they do something for their brainwasher or cult. Going on to target the layman tactic. Note, destructive brainwashers, the ones misleading people, target lay people. The individual is involved with a brainwasher that targets lay people. Followers of such a brainwasher usually have little to no knowledge of the subject at hand, making them easy to convince or easy prey. The individual believes and may be spreading information about a topic they lack schooling and experience in. The individual is the jump to conclusion type or lazy. The individual trusts a thought leader without investigating what they preach. The individual does not know how to research. The individual does not have time to research. Note, nobody is a know-it-all, and nobody has time to be one. Thus, we all have to trust people in professions other than our own. Destructive brainwashers, the ones misleading people, feed on that. The dependency tactic. The individual is dependent on a brainwasher or a cult in some way or form. The individual needs an advisor or leader, friends, sex, or whatever. Many people are not good at getting the things they need or want. Brainwashers and cults often use friendship to pull people in, thus the individual looking for friends gets friendship from the brainwasher or cult. The savior tactic. The individual has been led to believe the brainwasher is going to save him from something terrible. Often the savior is not a savior, and the terrible thing is not a terrible thing, if it exists at all. The individual is fearing something. The individual is visualizing a monster or monsters and thinks the brainwasher will save them. The use of fear tactic. Note, I am not addressing fear of brainwasher or cult punishment here. The individual has been led to fear something that is only a theory or a total fantasy. The fear is often those who disagree with the cult leader or the brainwasher, frequently referred to as the outsiders. The individual may be showing signs of behavior related to this fear. Note, we have a lot of people fearing things for no real reason, which means we have many people who are deciding without doing the required research. If you do not know how to research, many do not, or do not have time to do the required research, it is better not to take any form of action, at least not until you have done the required research. How to cure a victim of thought control. Here I am displaying constructive brainwashing. The truthful train of thought is being fed more than the fictional train of thought. This person is basing their decisions on truthful information, thus no need for treatment. An exception to this policy is when the person becomes overconvinced, whether truthful or not. In this case, it is usually enough to simply tell the individual never to be too sure of anything and always stay open to the possibility of being wrong or having missed something. Here I am displaying destructive brainwashing. The fictional train of thought is being fed more than the truthful train of thought. This person is basing their decisions on fictional information and may need treatment. In this case, your goal is to find ways to feed the truthful train of thought and to deter or stop fictional information from feeding the fictional train of thought. We are using a thought control process to get the individual back on the right track. In other words, we are using brainwashing to pull them back into reality. For the non-professional, first, since thought control or brainwashing cannot be sensed or felt in any way or form, the question is, who is in fact the victim of destructive thought control, you or them? To help ensure success, it is best to assume that you may be the victim. With that said, you both need to separate yourselves from one-sided thought leaders who resort to this reinforcement tactic. Then start researching together, both attempting to prove themselves wrong. Look for neutral and professional sources of information that most trained professionals agree on. This is the approach non-professionals should proceed with. Since thought control cannot be felt or sensed in any way or form, always consider and research the possibility that you are a victim of destructive thought control or brainwashing. The fact that somebody disagrees with your beliefs is generally the first indicator that somebody has been misled. One thing you do not want to do is to lead a victim of brainwashing from one brainwasher to another. Your goal should be to save them from brainwashers, not to take them away from one brainwasher and then lead them to another. Here are some tips when working with a victim of destructive thought control or brainwashing. Avoid presenting arguments to a brainwashed victim. In most cases, such will not work. Depending on the tactics used to brainwash them, they may see you as a threat. Brainwashed victims can be extremely dangerous. Do not lead them to think you are a threat. At best, show interest in what they tell you and simply ask them questions they should be asking themselves. By asking them questions they should be asking themselves, you are getting them to question what they have been led to believe and those they are blindly or unquestionably trusting. By the way, when seeking answers to those questions, go directly to professional sources, straight from the horse's mouth, as the saying goes. Avoid being the source of information yourself. That way, the individual is less likely to get angry with you. If you notice confusion, you are on the right track. If you see that they are getting upset or angry, you are likely on the wrong track, and the situation may be getting dangerous. The act of asking questions they should be asking themselves is usually more effective and by all means safer than presenting arguments. The possibility of an unpleasant event is being reduced. The act of presenting arguments will help degrade misleading information and help people from falling victim. However, when trying to cure a victim as a non-professional, it is not advisable, especially if the bad or alarming news and or the slandering tactics were used on the victim. Thought control needs reinforcement. It must be maintained. When this reinforcement is stopped, the brainwasher's control over the victims frequently dies out. Thus, another way of healing a victim is to separate them from their brainwashers or their thought leaders. If total separation is not possible, then try to reduce their contact with their brainwashers as much as possible. The more contact a brainwasher and his people have to their victims, the more success they will have. Hopefully, you now have a good understanding of thought control. As your first step in working with what you have just learned, I strongly urge you to evaluate yourself. Are you exposing yourself to too much one-sided information? Are you avoiding information from those thinking differently? Are you disagreeing with things most trained professionals are agreeing on? Are you believing information from a thought leader without seriously researching it? Since victims of thought control cannot feel or sense it, the best way to realize that you have fallen victim is by asking yourself such questions and to start seriously researching what you are being led to believe. Do not be a jump-to-conclusion researcher. Research can be very time-consuming. If it is an issue you need to get involved with, find the time and do it right. Destructive brainwashers feed off of those who do not research enough. Use what you now know about thought control to help yourself and your loved ones. Last but not least, be it an act of prevention or recovery, knowledge of thought control is a must if we ever want to get this under control. This concludes my presentation. If you think my efforts will help our society and wish to help, a donation will help me get this ball rolling. Thank you.